Welcome to the final video on this build, knock on wood. This build is being assembled to be given away, and the giveaway is actually going on right now, so there's a link to that in the video's description. If you are located in the United States, you're eligible to win this PC, so go ahead and enter. At the same time, it was built to promote an Extra Life charity live stream that Kyle and I did last weekend. So if you're also able to donate, funds for that are going to the Children's Hospital Los Angeles. It's a very good cause, and thank you for that. But today, we need to finish off the loop. We have a handful of things to do there, install the SSDs, and we finally have our custom sleeved cables from Insourced, so we're gonna install those too. Excellent! Kioxia invented NAND flash memory almost 35 years ago and has been applying that experience ever since to develop SSDs for consumers, businesses, and data centers around the world. Kioxia's latest line of NVMe SSDs are ideal for a range of uses, whether you need high-speed storage for a laptop or high-performance gaming PC, or an enterprise or hyperscale data center. A range of sizes and capacities, including the almost impossibly small M.2 2230 BG4, means there's a good fit for everyone, and PCIe Gen 4 support available with the CM6 and CD6 lineup allows for maximum performance when paired with AMD EPYC or Intel Xeon server hardware. For more on Kioxia SSDs, click the sponsor link in the video description. So the main reason we didn't fill the loop in video 2 was there are 2 runs at the very front of the system that I'm not 100% happy with. So I ordered one more little 45-degree angled adapter so we can do this run from the front radiator up to the reservoir pump combo unit, and then the other run from that radiator to the rear radiator. It's in there and it's installed, but the fitting there is not tightened down all the way, and the more I've looked at it, the more I've been like, I want to fix that too. So that's going to involve pulling this radiator out one more time to get those runs set up. Then we can install our custom sleeve cables, and I'll give you a closer look at those in just a minute. At the same time, we need to fix up the cable management in the back, because the other issue I had in video 2 was running the cable for the Lian fans up to this one. There wasn't quite enough cable length, and that kind of messed up my planned cable management there in the back. After that, we get to fill the loop, install Windows, give you guys a look at the lighting, and maybe even a brief taste at performance, so that whoever wins this system is gonna know what they're in for. So here are our 2 problem runs at the front. You can probably see this one is just being pushed away and sort of angling off. I also had to use a barrel extender here, which doesn't match with the rest of the build. So I got one more of these 45-degree angle fittings. These are $18 each. I'm gonna pop that on down there, so the tubing will come up at an angle, and we can just do a slightly longer, slightly angled run from there. And then this fitting over here, the compression sleeve on it is just very clearly not cinched down all the way, and I'd feel a lot better if we could handle that. So I'll also redo this run here, since I am going to need to pull this radiator out. Speaking of pulling the radiator out, I really did get ahead of myself in the last video by going and installing the graphics card. We just really wanted to fill the loop before I decided, no, it's not gonna happen. I need to pull the GPU out in order to get at the mounting points for this fan. Fortunately, with these rotary fittings, I should be able to just disconnect here and here, pull the GPU out, and then reconnect everything up once we're done. So here's the backside of the build, and you guys probably saw things got a little ugly in here, connecting all these cables up. I think it's okay though. I managed to wedge the Lian control box back there. It's actually not secured to anything back there, but it's being held in by all the cables that are just right on top of it. And then that allowed me to put this little holder in place that has our two 2.5-inch drives and get that wired up, and that does a great job of hiding some of the uglier part of the cable management back there. I've also been tagging some of the wires just so I don't lose track of them. I have one more RGB header here, and that's going to be for the GPU. And then I got Molex power coming from the power supply that's going to plug into the Molex connector for the pump, but I need to keep this loose so we can do the fill and test the pump and everything without turning the whole system on. That said, I flipped the system back around. Cable's already looking oh so pretty and matching really well with the rest of the build. So I just got to reinstall radiator fans, get those two front runs reconnected, GPU reinstalled of course, and reconnect these. Then we should be ready to fill. Yay. We're jumping ahead a little bit here, guys. I kind of skipped over a really bad scare that I had. We thought everything was going really smoothly. I sent Joe to get some lunch, and I was just gonna boot the system up. I was feeling so good and confident about the loop working well, and I wasn't detecting any leaks anywhere. So went to power on the system and had pretty much the worst thing that can possibly happen when you build a water-cooled system like this happen, which is I hit power, instant short. The system would not power on or boot up at all, and that typically means that you have a short somewhere. And when you have a short somewhere and you've just packed everything in, and you've got LEDs and you've got power and you've got stuff set up for the loop and everything, it's just a really bad situation because suddenly you move into troubleshooting mode trying to figure out what exactly is causing the short. So the first thing I did was just remove this SSD panel here to loosen things up back there in case the cables had gotten wedged in such a way that was causing a short. And then I was just turning the power supply off, then back on, then pressing power, and then having the same thing happen. And I almost started to think to myself, is this gonna mean like a video 4 or something like that? But if there was one thing that was going to not function properly in this system, this is probably the thing that is the best option because this is the custom sleeve cable for the supplemental CPU power. It's located right up here and it's a modular cable, so I was able to unplug it from the power supply side, and that caused the system to boot up. So that indicated to me that there was either a problem with the motherboard plug over here or a problem with these cables. So I went ahead and removed or just sort of unscrewed the 3-fan top configuration there. And again, just having a lot of benefit from these Lian Uni fans and being able to just remove a whole group of them at once and easily reconnect them. But I switched back to the stock cables that came with the Corsair SF750 and we're booted up. Windows is now installed. That solved the problem. And fortunately, those cables are in a position up here, which I was mentioning to Joe as I was installing them. They're really not visible at all. So as beautiful as these cables are, and again, mad respect to Joey for putting these together and getting them to us on time. If there was one set that I was gonna need to remove, this is probably the one that it should be, because I think at this point, we're just gonna go with the Corsair cables for that part because it's not really visible. And honestly, there's probably some basic bits of troubleshooting that could be done with this cable, but because everything's installed and functional and because this system is already up for giveaway, so I think we're just gonna move forward with the 24-pin and the PCI Express graphics cables, and everything looks beautiful, and we can move on with the LED lighting setup and actually doing a little bit of testing on the system. So here in the back, you can see the EKWB fans. Those are connected up to the ARGB splitter that's coming off of the motherboard. So these are synced with the white color that you can also see here in the pump reservoir combo. You can also see down here in the GPU block, the Radeon logo right there, which is currently all whites, and then also the CPU block back there. So that's indicating that yes, all of our LEDs for that part are working. And then here you can see all the Lian Uni fans, which are also all lit up too. Now, because I rewired some stuff, I wanted to see which channel was which. Here's a a quick look at the Lian software that they have for setting this up. You have 4 banks of fans. You can tell each bank how many fans are connected down here, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then you have some presets you can do, or you can also go with manual control over here. So I just set static color, and I did a different color, purple, blue, red, and green for each bank. And that's so I can double check which is which. When I first wired this all up, I had it set so it was 1, 2, 3, and 4, but now that kind of got changed around because I redid some of the wiring. So now you can hopefully see the green right here, the purple there, the red on the bottom, and the blue over here. And those are our 4 banks of fans. So at this point, I'm gonna do a little bit more setup, get the RGB LEDs going, and also get prepared to do a little bit of testing on this rig. We'll come back in just a moment and show you guys how it looks, all completed, put together, and with the lighting, sparkly, pretty lighting and stuff like that. Let's go. All right, guys, I've had some time to do a little bit of testing now, and I just wanted to share that with you right now. I'm doing a IDA64 stress test, and that has been running for a little over 10 minutes, a little over 11 minutes, I guess I should say. And we're just gonna be looking at CPU temperature right here. This top temperature line is the hot spot on the CPU. That is at 83.8 degrees maximum. Meanwhile, the average across all of the dies is at 78.5. So we can use that to compare to some numbers that I have. I'm just using the write it down on a piece of paper method, but hopefully this makes some sense to you. So the 2 columns here are my baseline, and I'm pulling some numbers from some previous testing I've done. So the CPU in the baseline test is water-cooled with a Kraken X62 from NZXT, and then the GPU is the 6800 XT stock cooler, and then just comparing that to the build I just put together on the right. So as you can see, average temperature is a little bit higher. However, the ambient temperature, I'm out in my garage right now, and it's the middle of the summer, so about 4 degrees hotter. Not necessarily that terrible. I would call these comparable. Again, I apologize, I can't do direct A/B comparisons due to the testing conditions. But if you look at the peak temperature, 83.8 versus 86.3, that is an improvement. So that shows me that that block is efficiently transferring the heat off of the CPU, so that's good. Meanwhile, our average clock, again, 4.55 gigahertz was what we got with the stress test with the test bed, just down slightly at 4.53 gigahertz with this rig, and that is likely due to that average temperature being higher, because higher temperature means the CPU frequency might be a little bit lower. I'm going to stop that test now because it's been running for plenty long enough and it's making it warmer here in the garage. I also ran a 3D Mark test and the results of that are right here. So here we have a graphics score for the 6800 XT and a CPU score for the 5800X. So yet again, I'm comparing those to some of my existing numbers. I do want to point out that my baseline numbers here for the 5800X and 6800 XT were recorded at different times and on different systems, but this should at least give you a ballpark idea of the difference in score. And the difference on the CPU side at least is about 40 points. And that did improve a little bit here versus my baseline score, but basically it's showing, yeah, it's running at about the same frequency and getting about the same score that it got with a very nice high-end all-in-one liquid cooler, which is kind of what you would expect. And this is part of the reason why full custom water cooling like this is more niche, is because all-in-one liquid coolers can be very competitive. Of course, you can't get quite as pretty as this and as custom as this and everything, so there is a give and take there. Likewise, our GPU score also went up from 8569 to 8674, so that's again in the same general ballpark. It's not too much of an improvement, but what I do want to point out is the GPU temperature, the max temperature and the hotspot dropped by about 30 degrees from an average of 83 and a peak of 94 on the hotspot down to an average of 50 C and a peak of 64 C. Now, I will point out that this is a relatively short test. The longer the test runs, the more the, I believe it's called the specific temperature of the entire loop, radiators and everything will continue to rise over time. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that my numbers here should be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, but again, I'm just trying to show you guys something to compare to if you were to compare this to a more, I guess a simpler system, a more simple test bed configuration that I have set up for some of my testing in the past. Now, before I close things off, I want to give you guys an assessment of some of the things that did not quite go according to plan towards the end of this build. Apart from the sleeved extension cable causing a bit of an issue with booting up, which had to be replaced, but fortunately that's working fine now. I also had an issue with the memory. The specs on this GeIL kit are pretty impressive since it's a 2x32 gig kit. That's 64 gigs total. 32 gigs on one stick is like double what a lot of people have for their entire system, so it's a beefy memory kit, and I was really impressed that GeIL was saying this is a DDR4 4000 mega transfers per second kit with cast latency like 1822 or something like that. I went and plugged in the XMP values and no post. I went and dialed in lower and lower and lower settings, and eventually I settled on DDR4 3533, which is about 500 mega transfers per second or so slower than the 4000 mega transfers per second that is advertised. Now bear in mind, DDR4 4000 is an overclock spec, technically. All of those higher memory frequencies are considered an overclock, and they're not guaranteed to work, and you need various parts working in tandem in order to get that to work properly. There is the memory itself, there's the memory controller that's part of the CPU, and there's the motherboard and how the trace layouts are designed there, and I can't necessarily point to one specific thing that is causing it to not work at that speed. That said, DDR4 3600 is what most people aim for. This is running just slightly slower than that, and for the memory capacity, and since it is such a high capacity kit, I think the trade-off there is reasonable. You get a lot of memory, you still get really good speed, and you're just missing out on maybe a 1 or 2% performance bump in certain applications that you would get with that higher speed frequency. Just disappointed that I wasn't able to plug in the XMP value and have it work. I also want to point out for these Lian Li Uni fans, as much as I've praised them in this video, they also have their drawbacks in certain ways as well. For one, I have both of them connected in the back here, and there's no way to flip just one set of fans in the software if you want to use some of these software modes that are supposed to be like a unified thing controlling all of them, so you can have like a runner going around from one to the next. So that's partially just the only way I felt like I could properly connect those up and wire them in an aesthetically pleasing fashion. And it's also partly my fault because I had them dialed in so it was going to be 1 on the front one, then 2 in the top, 3 in the back, and 4 in the bottom, and I got the wires switched at some point, but I discovered that that wouldn't even matter for, again, some of those more cool advanced functions, because the orientation of these, since you can't flip it, it wasn't going to go in the right direction anyway. The other shortcoming of the lighting configuration in this system, and it was so close, but you have the option in the Lian Li software to sync with motherboard control. By doing that, I would be able to potentially use the NZXT cam software to control all the lighting in the rig with just one piece of software, and that would allow you to more easily switch between especially static colors. However, we discovered that that mostly works, but because I have a 6-way splitter going off of the single 5-volt header on this motherboard for sort of a standard addressable RGB connector, there is a little bit of confusion there, and as a result, the front LEDs, like most of the LEDs on these 3-fan setups work when I go into sync mode, but just these front ones wouldn't sync up. So that made that feature, which would have been kind of convenient, not really usable. Instead, you still have to use the 2 pieces of software to either control the Lian Li lighting in the fans or the lighting on the CPU block, the reservoir, and the GPU block down here. That said, this I think is my favorite lighting configuration from the time I spent setting up different ones of those. I've got the NZXT cam software just set to red for the block, reservoir, and the GPU down here. The GPU also shines some light down on top, some red kind of glow down on top of the fans, which looks kind of cool. And then the Lian Li fans I just have set to white, and I think that's a really nice look overall and matches very well again with the white, silver, black, and red aesthetic for this overall build. And I just gotta say again, I'm really so happy with how this build turned out aesthetically, especially with some of the loop configuration up in the front that was getting a little bit confusing. And in case you're wondering why I did the tubing the way I did, other than I do think it looks kind of cool that way, but this system is expandable fairly easily. If whoever the winner is wants to add something, you do have a full-size PCIe expansion slot that's like totally accessible right there. And you could slot a capture card or something like that in there if you really wanted to. So I did want to leave this open, flexible for expansion options in the future too. But guys, after all this time and all this work, that is going to wrap it up for this series on this epic custom water-cooled build. And again, this is being given away. The giveaway is still open as of the publishing of this video, so I'll post a link to that in the video's description. And the reason I built this system and did the giveaway for it was to help raise money for our Extra Life charity event, which was this last weekend, and that is still open as well. Donations go to help support the Children's Hospital Los Angeles to provide life-saving medical procedures for children who cannot otherwise afford it. It's a very worthy cause, and I'll post, again, a link to the donation page for that. If you have a little bit of cash to spare, go ahead and do that. But again, donations are not required to enter to win this system. Good luck to all of you. Oh, and if you're an international viewer located outside the United States, unfortunately, you're not eligible for this PC because it's really difficult to ship a system like this across international borders, but an international viewer will win this, the Zotac RTX 3080 Ti. This is the amp hollow version of that. And I also have an upcoming video covering that as well. That will be available soon. So hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see that video when it goes live. Thanks to all of my sponsors who helped contribute components to put this together and help support the charity: Lian, GeIL, EK, NZXT, Ensourced Customs, Crucial, of course, coming in clutch with the storage configuration for this system, and links to all the parts I used are down in the video's description. Thanks again for watching this one, guys, and we'll see you in the next video.